He walked back into my life like nothing had happened. But everything had. Months of silence, a heart shattered, and then one look, and I knew I was still his. What started with a quiet hello ended in something we couldn't take back. And now, I'm left wondering, was it love or just the ghost of what we used to be? That afternoon felt unreal, like walking through the shadow of a memory rather than into a present moment. Months had passed, and I'd managed to convince myself that it was over, that what we had was gone, buried beneath silence and distance. But when I heard the familiar sound of keys in the lock, something in my body reacted before my mind could catch up. Daniel stepped through the door, but he didn't close it right away. He lingered, standing there like someone not sure if they were supposed to stay. The hesitation in his eyes was the first thing I noticed. Not fear, not guilt exactly. Just something uncertain, like he was stepping into a place that used to belong to him but no longer did. He looked different, though it wasn't about appearance. The energy was off. Slower, more weighted. There was a pause in him that didn't used to be there. And maybe it was only noticeable because I had spent so much time memorizing his rhythms. His steps across the hardwood floor echoed louder than they should have. Measured, deliberate, as if he were testing the ground with each one, unsure if it would hold. I didn't speak. Neither did he. The last time we saw each other, the silence between us had been born out of fury. Raised voices, closed fists, shattered glass on the kitchen floor. But this silence was different. He wasn't angry. He was searching. We finally stopped walking. We were still feet apart, standing in the living room that had once been ours. I saw him glance at the couch we used to curl up on during long winter nights, at the photograph still on the bookshelf that I hadn't yet had the heart to remove. I stayed still. I had built my life around stillness after he left. Moving meant remembering, and I had done everything possible to forget. But time doesn't clean up what's left behind. It only layers it in dust, waiting to be disturbed. And now he was here, kicking it all up again with nothing more than his presence. There was a shift in the air, subtle but sharp. I felt it in the base of my spine. That sense you get when you know something important is about to happen, even if you don't know what form it will take. I expected him to say something first. He always had the words. He was the one who turned silence into meaning, even if he twisted it to suit him. But today he seemed empty, like even his voice had abandoned him. Eventually, I broke the silence. Not because I wanted to, but because the weight of it was unbearable. I asked him why he came back, though the words came out softer than I intended. He didn't offer an explanation. Not immediately. There was a shrug, then a breath, and only after what felt like an eternity did he say something. Simple, quiet, impossible to ignore. He said he couldn't pretend anymore. The simplicity of it hit harder than any apology might have. Because for Daniel, pretending had been everything. Pretending he was okay. Pretending I didn't mean more to him than he let on. Pretending that running away was strength, not fear. I wanted to respond, to meet his honesty with my own, but I didn't trust myself to speak. I had built too many walls around the words that really mattered. The air between us thickened with all the things we weren't saying. Months of silence had created a vacuum, and now we were both standing inside it, unsure how to fill the space. He looked at me then, not the way he used to, not with that easy charm that once disarmed me so quickly. This was a different gaze, one that asked a question he didn't have the courage to say aloud. And I knew, deep down, this wasn't just a visit. This wasn't about closure. This was something else, something unfinished. The hours after Daniel returned felt like walking through a hallway lined with closed doors. Each one held a memory, and I didn't want to open any of them. Yet with every glance he gave me, every pause in his breath, something creaked open on its own. We didn't speak much that evening. Not because there was nothing to say, but because there was too much. The silence was heavy, but not empty. It was full of unsaid things, of words that had lived in the back of our throats for too long. I could feel him searching for the right moment to speak, but none of them seemed safe enough. He sat on the edge of the couch like a guest. Not like someone who had once memorized the shape of this home, the way light moved across the floor in the early morning, or how I took my coffee when I was tired. Now, all that intimacy had been erased by time, or maybe by fear. I stood by the window, arms crossed tightly across my chest. It was easier to look outside than at him. I watched the soft movements of the wind through the trees. Watched the world continue, unaware of the storm building in my living room. Daniel said my name once. Just once. Quietly. It didn't sound like a question. It sounded like a memory. I didn't turn. He was the one who left. He was the one who chose silence over explanation. I had waited weeks for a call that never came. Then months for the anger to stop stinging. It never really did. I just learned how to live around the ache. Still, there he was. And I couldn't pretend his presence didn't mean something. He shifted on the couch, his hands clasped tightly together like he needed to hold himself still. I remembered that about him. How his body betrayed his nerves long before his voice did. Eventually, he broke the silence again. He told me I seemed different. I didn't respond. I didn't want to admit how different I felt. How hollow. How carefully I had rebuilt myself around the space he left behind. But I had noticed it too. He had changed. There was no bravado left in him. No careless charm. He seemed quieter, smaller, like life had whittled him down to something more honest. And it scared me that part of me missed him this way. Memories began to resurface in pieces. The day he left, the way the door had slammed, the echo of my own voice, broken by desperation, the silence afterward, cold sheets, unfinished arguments that looped endlessly in my head. I wanted to ask him why. Why he didn't call. Why he didn't fight for us. Why he let everything fall apart. But I didn't. Not yet. The answers would come, and I wasn't sure I wanted to hear them. Instead, I told him that he shouldn't have come back if he wasn't ready to stay. The words came out flat, but they tasted bitter. He didn't flinch. He just nodded, like he'd already had that conversation with himself 100 times. Something in me softened just slightly. Not forgiveness, never that quickly, but something cracked. The truth was, seeing him again brought back more than pain. It brought back pieces of a life that still meant something, even if I didn't want it to. He looked at me again, and for a brief second, the man I used to know was there. Not the one who walked away, but the one who stayed up late talking about fears, about dreams, about building a life in a world that didn't always welcome men like us with open arms. I hated that I missed him. I hated that my heart still reacted to his voice. But I didn't stop looking, and neither did he. There was a silence between us that felt like a bridge, fragile, suspended in the air, waiting to be crossed. We didn't take a step yet, but we were closer to the edge than we had ever been. There's a certain silence that doesn't feel peaceful. It feels electric, like the moment before a storm hits, where the air is too still and the light looks wrong. That's what filled the room between me and Daniel. We hadn't moved in what felt like hours. His eyes found mine too often, and each time, something inside me pulled tight. It wasn't just memory. It wasn't just longing. It was recognition. Something buried, but not dead. He stood up slowly, not as a threat, not even with confidence, but with weight, as if he wasn't sure if his body belonged in this space anymore. I didn't step back. I didn't step forward either. My body remained fixed, but inside, everything was shifting. I felt like I was looking at a fault line, one crack away from breaking everything open. Daniel started to speak, but stopped. His mouth moved, but no sound came. I could see the words there, caught between fear and need. His hands trembled slightly, barely noticeable unless you'd spent years watching them the way I had. I should have asked him to leave. I should have told him that too much had broken between us. That this, whatever this was, would only end badly. But I didn't. I couldn't. He stepped closer, and I still didn't move. There was something burning behind his eyes. Not anger, not lust. Something deeper. Something that scared me more than anything he'd ever said. It was the look of someone who still hoped. He said he had been afraid. That's why he left. Afraid of how deeply he felt. Afraid of being seen fully, of loving someone the way he loved me. I almost laughed because I had been afraid too, but I stayed. I stayed and waited for someone who never came back. Until now. It was like hearing the truth too late to make it useful. I felt the old anger flare in my chest, but behind it was something softer, something more dangerous. Understanding. He moved closer again. Now we were only inches apart. I could feel the warmth of his breath in the space between us. Every part of me wanted to step away. Every other part wanted to fall into him. "This isn't right," I said, but even I didn't believe it. He didn't respond with words. He just looked at me, his eyes searching for any opening, any sign that I was still in this. That some part of me still remembered what it felt like to need him. I did. His hand brushed against mine. Barely a touch, but was enough to send a jolt through me. My breath caught. My pulse raced. And still, I didn't pull away. What we had wasn't safe. It wasn't stable, but it was real. And maybe that was why I couldn't stop what happened next. His lips found mine, hesitant at first, like he expected me to turn away. But I didn't. I kissed him back, hard, desperate, like I'd been holding it in for months, because I had. The tension shattered like glass. We moved without thinking. Hands, breath, heat, familiar and terrifying. Like stepping into a fire you once escaped but never forgot. His touch was careful at first, then more certain. My defenses crumbled. There was no logic in it. No plan. Just release. The room fell away. The months apart evaporated. In that moment, we weren't broken. We were just two men holding on to something that had once been beautiful and still hadn't completely died. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. We collapsed onto the couch, breathing each other in like air. It was as messy as it was inevitable. I stopped trying to label it. Stopped trying to judge it. For once, I let it happen. And in that surrender, I felt something I hadn't in a long time, alive. But even in the rush of it all, a quiet thought remained, waiting like a shadow. What happens when this moment ends? Because it would. And nothing would be the same after that. The stillness afterward was heavier than anything that came before. Not the silence of comfort or peace, but of consequence. The kind of silence where breath feels too loud, and your own heartbeat becomes a reminder that you can't take anything back. Daniel lay beside me, half-curled, one arm draped loosely over his chest. His eyes were open, fixed somewhere above, but I knew he wasn't really looking at the ceiling. He was somewhere else, maybe in the past, maybe in the guilt that was now hanging between us like smoke. I didn't know what to say. Words seemed too small now. Everything we'd buried had surfaced in a wave of heat and emotion, but the aftermath felt cold. Clean. Brutal. I sat up slowly, pulling the blanket around myself, though the chill wasn't in the air. It was in my chest. My hands were shaking, not from regret exactly, but from the weight of what we'd allowed to happen. He turned to look at me. There was softness in his gaze, but also sadness. I wondered if he was waiting for me to say it first. This was a mistake. But I didn't. I couldn't. Not yet. I didn't come back to confuse you, he said quietly, barely audible in the echoing quiet of the room. I nodded, even though he couldn't see it. I believed him. That didn't make it easier. There was a kind of vulnerability in Daniel I hadn't seen before. Not just the way he spoke, but the way he existed now. Slower. Less guarded, but that didn't erase the months of absence. The unanswered questions, the way he had vanished when I needed him most. I finally stood, gathering my clothes in silence. Each movement felt mechanical, rehearsed. I wasn't sure where I was going, just that I couldn't lie there any longer pretending the moment hadn't changed everything. "You're leaving?" he asked, still not moving. "I need space," I said, my voice tight, flat. "Time." He didn't fight me. He didn't beg. That almost made it worse. "I know I hurt you," he said. "And I'm sorry. I thought walking away would protect us both. I didn't realize it would wreck us." His words didn't land with force. They landed like a slow tide. Inevitable, quiet, impossible to stop. I didn't know how to respond. Some part of me wanted to shout. Another part wanted to reach for him. But instead, I said, "This changes everything." He nodded slowly, and that tiny gesture broke something in me. It wasn't defensive. It wasn't dismissive. It was just honest. And that was the problem. Everything between us had always been complicated, but now it was honest, too. "I thought I was past this," I said, my voice cracking for the first time. "I thought I had moved on." Daniel sat up now, eyes locked on mine. There was no blame in them, just understanding. The kind that comes only from someone who's been broken by the same thing you have. "I didn't expect this either," he said. Neither of us said what we both knew, but we wanted it. I felt the weight of the space between us. Even now, after everything, that magnetic pull hadn't weakened. And that scared me more than anything. "This can't happen again," I said, though the words tasted like ash in my mouth. He looked down at his hands, then back at me. "Maybe not, but don't tell me it didn't mean something." I didn't answer. I couldn't, because he was right. It had meant something, and that was exactly why it couldn't continue. If it meant nothing, I could walk away clean, but it meant everything. The door closed behind me with a soft click that felt louder than it should have. The hallway outside my apartment was quiet, still wrapped in the early light of morning. I stood there for a long moment, unsure of where to go, unsure if leaving had truly changed anything. My chest felt tight, like I had left something behind that I wouldn't be able to take back. Maybe I had. Maybe that was the point. Daniel hadn't followed me. He hadn't called out or tried to stop me. And somehow, that hurt more than if he had. The cold air outside woke me up. I walked with no direction, just moving because standing still felt unbearable. My thoughts were loud, spinning without focus. Memories, regrets, what-ifs layered on top of each other until I couldn't tell which ones belonged to the past, and which ones are just fear dressed up as nostalgia. I sat down on a bench in a park I didn't recognize. The world moved around me. Quiet joggers, someone walking a dog, a kid with a backpack and a juice box. Life uninterrupted. I felt invisible in it, disconnected, as if the weight of what happened between us had taken me out of time, and I wasn't sure how to step back in. What we had done couldn't be undone. The closeness, the kiss, the way his touch had lit something inside me I thought I'd buried. But now, in the cold daylight, I couldn't hide from the truth. It didn't matter that it had felt good. It didn't matter that it felt real. What mattered was everything that came with it. All the unresolved pain, the choices we'd made, the damage we had never repaired. There was something between Daniel and me that wouldn't die. I had tried to cut it out of me. He had tried to outrun it. But there it was, waiting. But just because something won't die doesn't mean it knows how to live. I pulled out my phone, stared at the blank screen for what felt like forever. No messages, no missed calls. My finger hovered over his name, but I didn't press it. I couldn't. Not yet. I didn't trust myself to speak to him again without falling back into that gravity. And I didn't know if I was strong enough to climb out a second time. By the time I got back to my apartment, the sky had shifted. That early blue of morning had faded into gray. The air felt heavier somehow. Or maybe it was just me. I walked through the empty space like a stranger. Everything was exactly where I'd left it. Neat, quiet, untouched. But I wasn't the same person who had lived in it yesterday. Not anymore. I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands resting in my lap. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of it all. Not just the confusion, not just the anger, but the loss. We had wanted something beautiful. We had even touched it once. But neither of us had known how to hold it. And now, all that remained was silence. Tic, indéniable, permanent. And yet, beneath that silence, there was still a question. Was this truly the end? Or just the pause before something neither of us could name? I didn't have an answer. Maybe I never would. Daniel had looked at me last night like he still saw something worth saving. And I had let him. I had let myself be seen. For one moment, we weren't broken. We were something whole. Fragile. Fleeting. Real. But real isn't always enough. I closed my eyes and took a long, steady breath. My hands were still shaking, but my heart had settled into something quieter. Ache instead of fire. Sometimes love doesn't end with a door slammed shut. Sometimes it ends with a whisper, a hand not held, a phone call never made. I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the city kept moving, just like it always had. And somewhere out there, Daniel was probably doing the same. I didn't know if we would ever speak again. I didn't know if time would dull the edges of what happened. But I knew one thing with quiet certainty. This wasn't closure. This was a silence that would follow me. Not as a weight, but as a truth.